Good evening, I'm Mike Marza, recapping what has been another key day in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. Cassie Ventura's former stylist took the stand today, saying he witnessed Diddy beating Cassie and once heard her say that she wanted to climb over a hotel balcony just to escape the former music mogul. Deonte Nash said he repeatedly witnessed Combs beat Cassie throughout the relationship. Combs' lawyers also asked for a mistrial today, so a lot to get to. In just a moment, we're going to be joined by ABC News legal analyst Channa Lloyd, back to dig deeper into everything that unfolded in court. But first up, Darla Miles has a recap from Lower Manhattan.
Wednesday afternoon, a former personal stylist for Bad Boy Entertainment testifying about the violent, complicated relationship between Sean Diddy Combs and Cassie Ventura, and that he was often caught in the middle. Federal prosecutors asking Deonte Nash, "What kind of threats did you hear Mr. Combs make to Miss Ventura?" Nash answering that he would beat her expletive, that he wouldn't put her music out, and that he would get her parents fired from their jobs. Deonte Nash, still a close friend of Ventura, telling the court about the many times he says Combs threatened to release sex tapes of Ventura participating in the days-long sexual encounters at hotels that he once heard her refer to as a freak-off. Nash testifying, "I said, well, girl, if he's going to release the sex tapes, then let him do it, because he is on them too." Prosecutors asking, how did Miss Ventura respond? Nash saying, she said he wasn't on them. It was her having sex with other men. Prosecutors asking again, what did she say about having sex with other guys? Nash responding to prosecutors that she didn't want to. The celebrity stylist saying Combs was also violent with him and that he once threw me on the car and started choking me out. And about another occasion when Combs showed up at his apartment and looked in the closet, looked in the oven for Cassie. And when asked by federal prosecutors how many times he helped Cassie hide from Combs, Nash telling the court too many to count. Upon cross-examination, defense attorneys starting off by asking Nash, "You testified about your relationship with Miss Ventura." Nash sharply responding, "Mrs. Fine." Defense attorneys going on to ask about the incidents of violence. "You still had interactions with Mr. Combs?" Nash answering yes. "So after the violence by Mr. Combs, you invited him and Cassie to come with you to a Halloween show, correct?" Nash again answering yes. Now, testimony for today has ended. It will resume tomorrow morning with the woman known as victim number 3 to federal prosecutors, who will be allowed to testify anonymously.
Our thanks to Darla Miles from Lower Manhattan. Joined now by Channa Lloyd. And it is interesting because when you have a witness like this kind of really taking all the oxygen in the room, which is interesting, on the witness stand, Mr. Nash, at one point, didn't he say, "I look good" or something like that?
He did.
And people busted out in laughter. A lot of serious stuff, too, as well, though, talking about the violence that he says he witnessed with Diddy beating Cassie. What was the most striking part of the testimony today?
The most striking part of the testimony was really when he went into the fact that Sean Combs said in front of him that he would release these sex tapes and do it at her parents' job. She said that made Cassie go into tears and that she was really sad about it. And he said it was very shocking for him, especially after having witnessed the violence immediately there before. So that was the most shocking testimony that really came out today.
We should mention, too, Cassie Ventura welcomed her third baby with her husband, Alex. And so you have that as the backdrop and her emotional testimony just, a couple of weeks ago. What do you think was the key win, if you will, for the prosecution today with Mr. Nash?
So with Mr. Nash, we got a couple of things. First, this whole idea that Sean Combs was blackmailing Cassie with these sex tapes, right? We have a third-party person who heard him also hold those tapes over her head. So that speaks to that. We also get someone else who speaks about the violence that she was under. She talks about packing those black duffel bags to go to the freak-offs and saying that she didn't want to participate and that she was only going because he wanted her to go. So again, that further bolsters the prosecution's case in chief in that she did not want to participate.
We heard a little bit out of Darla's report there that the defense attorneys then questioned Mr. Nash, saying if you were so worried and so scared, one, you didn't go to authorities. Two, you actually participated in hanging out socially with Sean Combs after this. How effective do you think the defense was in their trying to poke holes in the credibility of that?
I think that the defense did a good job. They were really trying to show that although there was this level of violence, it was somewhat more norm and that people still carried on. And it wasn't enough to stop them from being around him or to stop them from participating with him. And they tried to illustrate that very well. Another thing that they did bring out, though, on the defense side, is that they talked about the bodyguards and others trying to stop Sean Combs from abusing Cassie. And that speaks to that enterprise that's supposed to be moving and as one body, right? So now we see that people are not doing his bidding. And so the defense also brought that out as well.
Yeah, because that's one of the main charges that the prosecution is trying to prove. What do you think? We're about halfway through this trial, it seems like, based on the timeline that we know it now.
I mean, right now, the prosecution is still saying 5 weeks, so we're on the beginning of the third week, so we still have another little bit with them, and then 2 weeks with the defense. Although with the way the defense has been going, I think they may need more 3. So I think we're still looking at 6 weeks.
Gotcha. So let's talk about how the day began, because we heard from arson investigators. So much was made about Kid Cudi's car. If you're not familiar, rapper Kid Cudi briefly dated Cassie Ventura. Sean Combs, according to the testimony, became enraged by that, went over to his house at one point, and then also is accused of being responsible for firebombing Kid Cudi's car. Why is that so crucial to the prosecution's case?
So it's quite important because we have to remember that this RICO is built and they have to show that at least 2 of the predicate crimes, which means that 2 of these crimes were used by the enterprise to further the mission. And so one of them that they feel like is closest to being able to convince a jury is the arson charge. So this idea that this Molotov cocktail was put into the car, the prosecution really wants to put that on Combs, but let's remember there's no direct evidence. So that's why this testimony was so important. As you know, they asked for a mistrial due to some of that.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, they asked for a mistrial for the testimony. So they were talking about the fingerprints. There were 2 partial prints that were lifted off the glass bottle. And so, but however, they disappeared and no one knows why they were destroyed. So as the prosecution gets into this questioning, they said, well, why did they disappear? Is it unusual? The defense immediately objected and said, you know, outside the scope of the jury, they said, we'd like to move for a mistrial because we find that this information is highly prejudicial, because that's part of the prosecution's case, is that Sean Combs can do these things to hide his actions. And so this sort of alluding to the fact that it just disappeared said to the defense was like, no, this is overly prejudicial, and so we're moving for a mistrial. But the judge felt that he could give a curative instruction to the jury, and so he allowed them to continue.
And so what did the judge tell the jury? Because this is unfolding. And what is the jury doing? Are they looking sort of puzzled? Or are they trying to digest what is unfolding right in front of them? Because it seemed like a key moment at the time.
It absolutely was. And we have to remember that the jury was removed from the courtroom. When we have these types of debates about evidence, the jury is not present. So they didn't hear this portion of it, but those of us that were in the courtroom did hear it. And the judge basically came back and said any further or any questions that were asked, any answers that were asked about the fingerprints do not apply to this case, and they do not apply to this defendant. So he gave a curative instruction, and they were no longer allowed to ask any further questions about those particular fingerprints.
At this point in the trial, what do you make of it? I mean, how do you feel the prosecution is doing? Are they landing? Are they hitting their points? And have they built an effective case so far, or do they still need more time to connect the dots?
They definitely need some more time to connect the dots as far as RICO, because let's remember, we still haven't heard from enough employees. I think the jury's going to want to hear from more employees than the ones that were the victims, such as Cassie herself. They want to hear from others to see if we can put together this enterprise. Now, when we talk about the trafficking, when we talk about transportation for prostitution, I think they've hit those parts very clearly, and we see them basically, you know, sort of supporting those initial arguments by bringing in these other witnesses to testify to that. But they definitely need more time to build their case.
Mr. Nash, back on the stand tomorrow, and then as we heard Darla mention, we expect to hear from this other alleged victim. How crucial is that when so much was made about Cassie Ventura's experience, the way she testified and what she testified to, her allegations, but now you have another person coming forward?
So that always is going to help, because we have to look at Cassie Ventura and look at their relationship. This was an 11-year relationship that clearly had a lot of domestic violence aspects of it. At part-time, she may seem as though she comes across as a willing participant. And so that muddies the water. I think when we start to see these other victims that had clear defined roles that he crossed over, we start to see that objective testimony. And I think that's what the jury is looking for, because that 11 years was a little bit murky. It was a little bit muddy. They were on again, off again. There were other people introduced. There was so much going on in that relationship that I think these other relationships are really going to support what the prosecution is trying to show.
And then finally, for this conversation, I mean, you've been part of these trials. If you're a jury, I mean, this is a long trial, and it is a high-profile trial. You're not supposed to talk about it with your other jury members. but this has to be weighing on them every single night as they still go through their normal lives. How much of a burden is that, I guess, for the prosecution and the defense as they know this jury is going through this marathon with a lot of heavy testimony as well? Correct.
I think it's always hard. And when you talk to jurors after these trials, what I've found is that jurors find it very hard because when you hear something, you want to talk and share and see if someone else heard what you heard and have that debate. But they actually have to wait until the completion of trial to do that. That's very hard. But this jury is trying they are taking notes. You see them taking copious notes when it's something they're interested in. And it's very interesting because when they don't feel like they're connecting with what's being said, you see them kind of close their book and just sit back and listen. So they're very much engaged. And these notes are what are going to guide them because remember, 8 weeks of testimony is a very long amount of information to process and to retain. So when they go into those deliberations, those notes are going to be vitally critical for them making these arguments to one another.
We'll see what happens. A long way to go, sounds
yes.
like. Channa, great to have you in as always. Court, again, resumes tomorrow morning. Stay with Eyewitness News and ABC7 NY for all the updates. We also have a real-time blog happening, so when the developments happen in court, you'll find that at the blog, all the information and updates at ABC7 NY.